Morning. Welcome again to Some Idiot Reads. I'm Cy. I'm some idiot, and it's time to read. And actually, since I'm thinking about it, give me like 2 seconds, because I need to sit. Oh, that's wireless. I need to make sure and mute my phone for once. Hi. This is becoming a pattern. I really need to break that, where I'm recording like literally the morning of. But, check it out. Roommate, Squidge, 3D printer. He printed me a friggin' mini nuke from Fallout, and I think that's pretty cool. Anyway, we're going to continue today. That's a non sequitur. So, we are continuing today with Unsong by Scott Alexander. Did a quick skim ahead, and looks like it's only going to probably be just the one chapter and the interlude, so we will see on this one. Let me get myself some preliminary water. Alright, let's dive in. Chapter 5. Never seek to tell thy love. Quote, "My beloved is like a bit of information that flows in the system." KingJamesProgramming.tumblr.com. I remember the first time I met Anna Thurmond. I'd just been kicked out of Stanford. My mother was a wreck, and I had to get away from her. I took the first minimum wage job that I could find, a clerk position at Cash for Gold. It wasn't so bad. There was a sort of Kabbalah to it, interchanging symbols with material reality. I could respect that. I sat behind a register and studied Talmud and Zohar most of the day, and sometimes an elderly woman would come in to trade her jewelry for less than it was worth, and I would facilitate the transaction. Every so often, I would get a particularly interesting Talmudic track date and stay past closing time. Sometimes I'd be there late into the night. It was a more congenial environment than my mother's apartment. Nobody noticed and nobody cared. That was why I still was there at 11 or so one night when I heard a commotion outside. I opened the door and caused a stunningly beautiful girl to fall off of a stepladder. "Euphemism," she said. I swear to God, she said euphemism. "Are you okay?" I asked. She was. She was holding 2 big yellow letters. I looked up at our sign. It was missing 2 big yellow letters. "What do you think you're doing?" I asked. I'm bad at sounding threatening, but she was like 5'4", maybe 5'5", and also lying on the ground looking very ashamed, and so putting menace into my voice was easier than usual. "Kabbalah," she said. I looked up at the sign again, and it read, "Cash or God." "It's a Kabbalistic protest," she said faintly, "against a society that thinks..." "You're not a Kabbalist. If you were a Kabbalist, you'd have more respect. You can't just go removing letters from signs like that. Matthew 5:18, "Verily, I say unto you, not a single letter, not even the stroke of a letter, shall be removed until all is fulfilled." "Oh, you want to go there?" She caught her breath and stood back up. Matthew 16:4, "This evil and adulterous generation wants a sign, but no sign shall be given to it." I blinked. Maybe she was a Kabbalist. "But," I said, "by removing the letter L, you make God out of gold. But the warning against idolatry in Exodus 20:23 says, 'You shall not make a god out of gold.'" But," said the girl, "Exodus 25 says that you shall take gold and turn it unto the Lord." Now I was annoyed. "You have taken an L and an F, I said. But if you map the Latin alphabet to Hebrew gematria, L and F sum to 26. The Tetragrammaton also has a gematria value of 26. So taking an L and an F is mystically equivalent to taking the name of God. But the third commandment is, you shall not take the name of God in vain. Okay, but the sound of L and F together, she said, is Aleph. And Aleph is silent and represents nothingness. So I've taken nothing. I heard the whine of a siren. Tell it to the cops, I said. She ran. She didn't even take the ladder. She just turned and ran away. It wasn't like I'd even called the police. It was just a coincidence, if you believe in such things. For some reason, a cop with a siren was out there at 11 p.m. doing cop things, and she heard it and ran away. And I got to spend pretty much every waking moment over the next 6 months wondering who she was. I checked all the universities with programs in Kabbalah, and I got nothing. No leads. As embarrassing as it was to ask, hey, does a pretty girl with blonde hair and a sort of bun who's really good at certain kinds of wordplay go here? I sucked up and asked at Stanford, Berkeley, even Santa Clara, and I got nothing. I moved on to the yeshivas, even though most of them didn't even admit women. Nothing. It was a cold autumn night, and I'd finished asking what was absolutely, positively, the last yeshiva I was going to bother checking out, just as I thought I had the past several weekends. One thing had led to another, and we had gotten into an argument about the creation of the universe, and finally we agreed to take it to the bar, where I proceeded to repay their friendliness by sitting in a corner and not talking to anybody. I was only half paying attention when a girl walked up to one of the rabbinical students, told him she was pretty, and asked him to kiss her. It wasn't my girl. My girl was short and had blonde hair in a sort of bun and spoke way too fast. This was a tall girl with dark hair that looked like it had rejected a mohawk as too conformist and set forth with only an ox and a Conestoga wagon into new and exciting realms of weird hairstyles. The rabbinical student, a cherubic-faced young man with absolutely perfect curly hair, whose name I think was David, apologized and said that he was a rabbinical student and not big on kissing weird girls at bars, whose hairstyles seemed to be inspired by the crests on species of extinct reptiles. Or something to that effect. Wow, said the girl. A real rabbinical student. I tell you what, if I know something about the Bible that you don't know, will you kiss me? My ears perked up. You don't understand how heavily these people train. It's Torah, 8 hours a day, since they are old enough to sit up straight. They've got the thing memorized by now, and then some. If you know something about the Bible I don't know, you can do whatever you want with me, David said, laughing. Said the weird girl. She made a show of thinking about it. I've got one. How long did Joseph spend in the belly of the whale? 3 days and 3 nights, he said practically instantly, before I could warn him. Oh, so sorry, said weird-haired girl. David looked at her. I can quote you chapter and verse, Jonah 1:17. Would be a lovely answer, if I'd asked that. I asked you how long Joseph was in the belly of the whale. The rabbi trap had been sprung. His face turned red. There's nothing in the Bible saying for sure that Joseph didn't spend time in a whale too. No, said Weird Hair Girl. I'm no rabbi, but I'm pretty sure that zero, zilch, nobody in the Bible spent time in a whale, except Jonah. And the wives of the men slain in Sennacherib's invasion of Jerusalem, I interjected before I could stop myself. 2 sets of eyes suddenly pivoted in my direction. The wives of the men slain in Sennacherib's invasion of Jerusalem, said David, did not spend time in a whale. Oh, they absolutely did, I said, because at this point I was in too deep to back out. They were very vocal about it. Weird Hair Girl raised an eyebrow. It's all in Byron, I said, then quoted, and the widows of Asher were loud in their wail. Blink, blink went the girl's eyes. Then suddenly, I hate you, and I hope you die. Then, wait, no, death would be too good for you. You need to meet my cousin. Then, drink. She dragged me over to a table and shoved a beer at me. So, when the thread of my memory resumes late the next morning, I found myself laying in a strange bed, mostly naked. I silently resolved not to go binge drinking with rabbinical students ever again. Wait. That's actually in the text. I'm just using this as a moment to clean my glasses off, because they got crap on them. Also, as much as I love my coffee, on occasion, the smell will futz with my nostrils when I'm trying to talk. Standing over me, as if scrutinizing a horse for purchase, was Weird Hair Girl. And next to her, with precisely the same expression, was my short blonde girl with pale blue eyes, the girl with the ladder. He told me a terrible whale joke, protested Weird Hair Girl. And first I wanted him to die, but then I realized that would be too good for him, and I told him he had to meet you instead. What was the joke? Asked the blonde girl. It was... Weird Hair Girl thought for a second. Do you know how many beers I had last night? You want me to remember things? Specific things. Huh, said my blonde. She looked straight at me with the pale blue eyes. I don't think she recognized me. What was the joke? I protested. I don't even know where I am. I don't even know your names. In my head, I've been calling her Weird Hair Girl, and you, I cut myself off before I said something like, the girl I'm going to marry. How am I supposed to remember a whale joke? The girl I was going to marry ran her fingers through her pale blonde hair in frustration and deep thought. Since you came up with it last night, she said, you must be able to come up with it again. You were with rabbinical students, therefore you were talking about the Bible. Biblical whale jokes. What comes to mind? Obviously the biblical king Ahab is suspect given his namesake, so... Ahab was visiting Jerusalem, and he kept trying to shoot Moby Dick from there. But it's so far inland he couldn't reach the sea with his harpoon, so he ordered the construction of a great rampart to give him a height advantage. She stared at me, a calculating stare. And to this very day, it's known as the Wailing Wall. I finished, and both of us started giggling. Wait, said Weird Hair Girl. Why did I think introducing the two of you would be a good idea? This is the worst thing that's ever happened. And then Ahab died and went to hell, she added, where there was much wailing and gnashing of teeth. But, I said, it was all in accordance with the wail of God. Wait, said the blonde, I've got one. Why is the sea so noisy after the destruction of Sennacherib's army? I thought for a second, then I thought for another second. I got nothing, I said. Because, said the blonde girl, the widows of Asher were loud in their wail. Wait, no, that was it. That was my whale joke. I swear to God, that was my whale joke. This was the biggest mistake of my life, and I hope you die, said Weird Hair Girl. Part 2. I remember my first morning there, the morning it all came together. The girls finally dragged me out of bed and insisted on making me breakfast. Weird Hair Girl was named Erica. Girl whom I will someday marry was named Anna. Together, they led me downstairs to an expansive dining room. Welcome to Ithaca, Anna told me as I sat down and plunked my head on the table, still a little hungover. You need food, Erica stated, and disappeared into the kitchen to fetch me some. Anna went with her. They were whispering to one another. Giggles may have been involved. It was a big house, a little old, but well-maintained. From one wall hung a sort of banner with a big Hebrew letter Yud on it. 10th letter of the alphabet, representing the 10th commandment, thou shalt not covet, with the obvious implications for capitalism and wealth accumulation. The big Yud was a Stevensite symbol. These are Stevensites. It fit. But I could do better than that. I turned my attention to the bookshelf on the far wall and tried to see what I could glean. They had the usual sci-fi fantasy classics, Tolkien, Asimov, Salvi, then some meteor fare. Zaynti the Economist, Chetlock the Prognosticator, Tetkowski the Futurist, Yutka the Novelist, good old Kaf bin Clifford. I recognized a few I'd seen before by their covers alone. Nachman Bernstein's Divinity, Nachman Eritz's Alphanomics, Menelaus Mollman's Letter to the Open-Minded Atheist, Gebron in Lazar's Kabbalah, A Modern Approach, Ben Aharon's Gematria Since Adam, Rachel Sephardi's Arriving at Aleph, Rav Kurzweil's The Age of Mechanized Spirituality, and... really? The collected works of Eliezer Ben Moshe? I stared at the shelf greedily. I didn't have half of these. I hoped they weren't too serious about the not coveting. It was only after finishing my scan of the books that I turned to the other possible source of information in the room. Hi, I said to the guy sitting at the end of the table. He was tall and looked like he worked out. I'm Aaron Smith Teller. Nice to meet you. Brian Young, he said, barely looking up from his paper. Welcome to Ithaca. So I've heard. Is this some kind of group house? You could say that, said Brian. Brian's the strong, silent type, Anna said, returning from the kitchen with coffee. She poured me a mug. That's why he and Erica get along so well. He never says anything. She never shuts up. Yes, we're a group house. Erica prefers the phrase commune, but Erica prefers a lot of things. I am standing right here making your food, Erica shouted from the kitchen. So, are you guys some kind of Stevensite group, or... I started to ask. Anna put a finger to her mouth and whispered, Shh, she'll hear you. Erica came in bearing 4 plates of toast. She said in an I'm glad you asked, she said in an inappropriately chirpy voice, and picked up Stevens's The Temple and the Marketplace off the shelf. Have you read this? The early years, after the discovery of names, or the first names, had been a Haiti time, as would-be wizards had learned the few known incantations and built exciting new technologies on top of them. The luminous name had been worked into various prayers and magic squares and configurations to produce lights of dizzying shapes and colors. Clever inventors and self-funded workshops had incorporated the kinetic name into all sorts of little gadgets and doodads. The best Kabbalists had developed vast superstructures of prayers and made them available for free on the earliest computer networks to anyone who wanted to experiment. That ended with the founding of the great theonomic corporations. They gradually took over the applied Kabbalah scene in the 80s. Their grip tightened early in the 90s after the President and Comet King worked together to create Unsong. Suddenly, every new name had a copyright attached to it, and the hundreds of lines of prayers and invocations people used to control names and bend them to your will were proprietary material. The old workshops became less and less relevant. The old self-employed Kabbalist geniuses were either picked up to serve as drones at the theonomics, or turned into increasingly irrelevant, bitter old men. It was in this atmosphere that Reverend Raymond E. Stevens of the Unitarian Church had written The Temple and the Marketplace. The book was 250 pages of sometimes excessively dense screeds, but it essentially argued that a whole host of biblical commandments, most notably, thou shalt not covet, and thou shalt not take the name of and thou shalt not take the name of the Lord thy God in vain, were best interpreted as describing the divine names discovered after the sky cracked, prophetic injunctions intended to make sense only millennia after they were written. Taken together, these commandments formed a schematic for an ideal economy, the quote-unquote, or the titular quote-unquote temple, in which the wealth-creating powers of the Kabbalah were shared by everyone. The modern world was ignoring God's plan in favor of unrestricted capitalism, the titular quote-unquote marketplace, and inviting terrible retribution upon themselves. Stevens saw himself as a modern-day Jeremiah, warning the Israelites to repent before they suffered the full force of God's vengeance. Despite being, by all accounts, something of a crackpot, his explanation of the dimensions of Solomon's temple as occult references to economic parameters reminds me of Newton's, only less lucid. He was, however, in the right place at the right time. Stevenism spread among bitter old Kabbalists, teenage Marxist punks, spiritual but not religious hippies, and anyone who found themselves unexpectedly locked out of the new economy. It went from oddly specific theory to generic badge of the counterculture, and the same sort of people who spent the 60s talking about vibrations without really knowing what they meant, spent the 90s talking about the secret meanings of weird Levitical commandments. "You guys are Unitarians?" I asked. Stevens had been a Unitarian minister, and his work had spread like wildfire across the Unitarian community. After President Cheney cracked down on the church itself in the early part of the new millennium, what was left of Unitarianism was almost entirely Stevensite. Little religious communities built along lines ordained by the Reverend's books, singing the forbidden names of God during services. It was part prayer, part act of civil disobedience, and part military training. People who really knew the names tended to be bad people to mess with. "We're the Unitarian hub," said Erica, "for all of North San Jose, and I run the Bay Area Unitarian magazine, the Stevensite Standard. Listen." She stood on a chair and started giving what, from then on, I would always recognize as the spiel. The spiel was one of the few constants of life at Ithaca. Roommates would come and go, intellectual fads would burst into the scene in glorious bloom before vanishing in a puff of general embarrassment, but the spiel remained. Erica can do it convincingly while sober, but spectacularly while drunk. She had converted entire bars full of people to her particular brand of radical theological anarchism on several occasions. Over years of practice, she had perfected it down to a 2-minute, 7-second elevator pitch, which she had, so far, recited in manners including blind drunk, on one foot, driving a motorcycle, and while having sex with 2 men at the same time. The month I met her, she had been working on learning juggling, so she picked up 3 balls and began to orate. God is born free, but everywhere is in chains. The names, our birthright, as children of Adam, the patrimony, which should have ensured us an age of plenty like none other in human history, have been stolen from us by corporations and hoarded out to buy yachts for billionaires. The fertile name brings forth grain from the earth, speeding the growth of crops by nearly half. Children of Ethiopia starve to death, and Ethiopian farmers cannot use the fertile name to grow corn that would save them. Why not? Because Amalek holds the patent and demands $800 up front from any farmer who wants to take advantage of it. The purifying name instantly kills 18 species of harmful bacteria, including 2 that are resistant to all but the most toxic antibiotics. But 2/3 of American hospitals have no one licensed to use the purifying name. Why not? Because they can't afford the licensing fees demanded by Gog-Magog. In the old days, we told ourselves that poverty was a fact of life, that there wasn't enough food or medicine or clothing or housing to go around. Then, it was true. Now, it is false. To feed the hungry or heal the sick no longer requires scarce resources. It only requires a word that the entire international system of governance, corporations, politicians, Unsong has united to prevent the needy from ever obtaining. 86% of the known names are held by 7 big Damn! Erica had dropped her balls. She picked them up, then continued. 86% of known names are held by the 7 big theonomic corporations: Microprospus, Gog-Magog, Amalek, Countenance, Tetragrammaton, El Eshon, and Serpents, the biggest, with $174 billion in assets. Its CEO has a net worth of $9 billion, 5 beach houses scattered across the United States, and her own private 12-seater jet. When Marx heard of such injustices, he demanded we seize the means of production. But today, the means of production aren't factories to be seized by mobs with pitchforks. They're names to be taken in spiritual struggle and spread around the world until the system is seen for the sham it really is and crumbles of its own accord. Thus, William Blake, quote, "I will not cease from mental fight, nor let swords sleep in my hand, till we have built Jerusalem in England's green and pleasant land," end quote. And the theonomic corporations will stop at nothing to thwart us, Erica warned. The Clipot are... I know what they are, I interrupted. I was expelled from Stanford for publishing a method for breaking Clipot. Erica dropped her balls, then fell off a chair. "Name," she shouted. "I knew you seemed familiar. I organized a protest for you." 2 years ago, I'd been exactly where I wanted to be. A Stanford undergrad studying applied Kabbalah on a nice scholarship. I'd just finished a class on Clipot, and was playing around a bit. In the theoretical Kabbalah, Clipot are these sort of demonic scleroses that encrust the divine light and make it inaccessible. But in applied Kabbalah, the word is used to describe cryptographic transformations of the names of God that allow them to be used without revealing them to listeners. Imagine you've discovered a name that lets you cure cancer, and you want to cure a customer's cancer, but you don't want them to learn the name themselves so they can steal your business. Instead of speaking the name aloud, you apply a cipher to it. If you want, change all the A's to E's and the B's to Z's so that Abba becomes Eze, and speak the cipher while holding the original fixed in your mind. The name has the desired effect, and your ungrateful customer is left with nothing but the meaningless word Eze, which absent the plain text version is of no use to anybody. The problem is all names follow certain numerological rules. The Maharaj rankings are the most famous, but there's over a dozen. So, by working backwards from a klippa, it's usually possible to narrow down the plain text name to a very small collection of possibilities, which you can then check by hand. Or by mouth, as the case may be. You end up with a race between the rights holders of names trying to develop better and better klippot, and everyone else trying to discover better and better ways of breaking them. Well, I joined team everyone else in college and came up with a pretty nifty new algorithm for breaking Nehemoth, one of the big klippot used by the Gog Corporation, with about 1% as much hassle as anyone else had come up with. My advisor told me not to publish, and I ignored him. Turned out giant evil corporations don't like having their multi-billion-dollar properties rendered useless. Nothing I'd done was illegal per se, but they put pressure on Stanford to expel me, and expel me they did, and a few months later their Applied Kabbalah department had a new professorship endowed with Gog-Magog money, and I was broke and living with my mother. Not that I'm bitter. Yeah, I said half-heartedly. Thanks. You, said Erica. You need to join us. You're like a real-life freedom fighter. A martyr. Like the Israelites at Masada. You fought the law. Yeah, and the law won, I said. Did Anna tell you where she found me? An old cash for gold shop on Briar Street. Erica was barely listening. You're a hero in the battle against tyranny. And a Kabbalist. We need Kabbalists. Right now, Anna's leading the choir, but she's an amateur. You are a professional. You need to join us. Brian's moving out in a few weeks. There will be a room opening up. I rolled my eyes at the hero part, then at the battle of tyranny part, and the third time at me being professional at anything, until it looked like I had some kind of weird eye movement disorder. I stopped when I heard room opening up. How much is rent? I asked. Oh ho, said Erica, suddenly. Interest. A brief flurry of awkward glances between Anna and Erica, and occasionally Brian, who refused to return any of them, and continued reading the paper. Finally, Erica spoke. $500 a month, she said. I stared her in the eyes. What's the catch? This was the Bay Area. A rat-infested hovel went into the 4 digits. Said Anna. Erica finished her sentence. Anna's family is very wealthy and has kindly, albeit unknowingly, offered to subsidize the rest of us. Unknowingly, I asked. I'm a grad student at Stanford, said Anna, and I tell them I need the money for room and board. How much? I asked. A few thousand. And they believe you. Well, it is the Bay Area. She had a point. My mind added. Beautiful and witty and rich. Part 3. I remember the day that I first saw Anna in her element. She was studying at Stanford. I'd checked Stanford when I was looking for her, but I'd checked the wrong place. She wasn't studying the Kabbalah per se. She was a grad student in philosophy. Her area was theodicy. A question of how a perfectly good God can allow a universe filled with so much that is evil. Who even studies theodicy anymore? After 2,000 years of hand-wringing, what's left to say? There must have been something, because journals kept publishing Anna's work, and a few months before I met her, she was named the Augustine Distinguished Scholar in Theodicy, apparently a big national honor that came with a heap of money. It was her passion, her great love, her reason for being. Don't you get it, Aaron? She would say, animated almost to the point of mania. We're looking at all of this the wrong way. The divine names, the laws of physics. We're asking what when we should be asking why? Why did God create the universe the way he did? Why the names? If we really understood God's goodness, then we can predict anything. What will the stock market do next year? Whatever it's best for it to do. Who will win the next presidential election? Whichever candidate is better. If we really understood divine goodness, we would understand everything. Past, present, and future. I gingerly pointed out the world was terrible. That's exactly the things Anna said. How do we square our knowledge that God wants as good a universe as possible with the terrible universe we ended up with? Square that circle, and literally everything falls into place. Every Sunday night, Erica hosted a dinner party. Every Sunday night, one guest was tasked with giving a presentation. Something they were interested in, something to keep us entertained while we waited for the food to be ready. A few weeks ago, Erica herself had talked about running the Standard and how she was going to get distribution networks going across the California Republic and maybe into the Salish Free State. The week before, I had talked about a paper out of MIT expanding on Rubinstein's sieve, one of the most important methods for narrowing down namespace. Now, it was Anna's turn, and of course, she was going to talk about the Book of Job. The chairs were full, as usual. I recognized Bill Dodd. He'd been a physics grad student at Berkeley before ending as one of the washed-up scientists who seem to be everywhere in the Bay these days. The type instantly recognizable by their tendency to respond to things which were none of their business with, "As a physicist, I think." I recognized Eli Foss. Calm, quiet Elliot. Erica had picked him up at a Unitarian meeting in Oakland. Picked him up in both senses of the word. Well, two of the three. She hadn't literally lifted him. Rumor had it he was actually religious instead of meta-ironically religious, but no one could tell for certain, and the whole idea made us sort of uncomfortable. I recognized Allie Hugh, who was smiling awkwardly and talking to Elliot in her crisp, overly enunciated English. Her family had been bigwigs in the harmonious Jade Dragon Empire during the latest round of purges. They'd fled to California, and now they owned half of the southern Santa Clara Valley. Allie had only been on this side of the world 6 or 7 years, but had already fallen in with a bad crowd. Namely, us. The doorbell rang, and I answered it. I recognized Zoe Farr. She was in a tight pink t-shirt with a big Yud on it. Karen Happick from the North Bay had been selling them at cost a couple months ago. I think I had a white one at the bottom of a drawer. Unworn. "You're late," Erica told her. There was no malice in her voice, only confusion that someone might risk missing her cooking. She'd poured blood, sweat, and tears into building our little community, but the secret ingredient had turned out to be soup. She was really a good cook, and what her magazine and occasional impassioned speeches couldn't do, an invitation to one of her dinner parties might. It was weird, the way little things like that turned on the wheels of destiny. I've always wondered if history is missing some story, like how the Founding Fathers only declared independence because Martha Washington served amazing stew every time there was a Continental Congress. I sat back down. The conversation had shifted. Bill was asking Allie why the house was called Ithaca. Allie was giggling and saying she was sworn to secrecy. The chair next to me was empty. The doorbell rang, and I opened the door again. "Hello," said Perendial, ducking and fidgeting awkwardly to fit his tall, winged form through the door. "I am here. I brought you an offering." He held out a bouquet of extremely dead flowers. I shot Erica a look, which I hoped encoded, "You invited a fallen angel to the dinner party? Really?" She shot a look back, which I interpreted as, "Well, he's part of the cause, and he probably doesn't get out much, and also, shut up." When did you get these flowers?" asked Erica, patiently. "A month ago," said Perendial. "The day you invited me. I wanted to make sure I did not forget." "You do remember," asked Erica, "that flowers wilt after being dead for too long?" Perindial's face fell. It was obvious that he'd forgotten. Erica shot me a "don't shoot me any looks" look, so I didn't. Fallen angels were always forgetting little things, like the tendency of earthly life to decay and die, or wondering why the news today was different than the news 6 months ago, or being surprised again and again when people turned out to not be very nice. It was why they were usually complete wrecks. Anna was actually the last to arrive, even though she lived here. She looked ethereally beautiful as she descended the staircase, a bag of books in her hand. She reached the table, sat down beside me, started passing out books, one per person. Fellow singers, the Book of Job. There weren't enough copies for the Book of Job for all of us, which was either a metaphor or bad planning on Anna's part. Perindial knew it by memory, which made things a little easier, and Erica was still at the stove preparing the main course, but I still ended up sharing a copy with Allie. "The Book of Job," said Anna. She had the voice of a singer, lowercase s, though as far as I knew she'd never had any vocal training. When she spoke, people listened. Totally unique among biblical manuscripts. It's not set in Israel, but in Uz, maybe somewhere in Arabia. It probably predates Israel as a settled state. It's written in a much older form of Hebrew than any other biblical book. It gets quoted in Isaiah, which means it's older than the prophets. It gets quoted in Psalms, which means it's older than King David. The lexicon is totally different. So many foreign words that scholars suspect it was written in something else and translated later on. So maybe older than the Hebrew language itself. This thing is old. And there's one other difference between Job and the rest of the Bible. Job it's self-aware. It takes these questions we all want to ask reading the rest of the Bible. If God is good and all-powerful, how is there so much evil in the world? And instead of ignoring them, it runs into them head on. Like, haven't you ever read the Bible and had questions and wished you could just ask them to God directly? Job is the book where someone actually does that. Anna's enthusiasm wasn't exactly infectious, but it was honest. You didn't always become interested in what Anna was talking about, but it was hard not to become interested in Anna. But it's also the greatest disappointment in the history of literature. You had this frame story where the very righteous man, Job, falls on hard times, and he asks his friends, why is this happening to him? And his friends say that surely bad things never happen to good people, so Job must have done something wrong. And Job insists that he hasn't, and he's right. In fact, later, God's going to command that the friends sacrifice various animals to atone for besmirching Job's name in this way. Job is just a really, really righteous guy who suffers an immense amount. And finally, we get to the climax where Job demands an answer, and God appears in the whirlwind, and we think we're finally going to hear the official, biblically approved answer to the problem at the heart of religion and human existence. And God just says, well, open your books. Anna took a deep breath in, and although she was short and adorable, she did her best to speak in the booming voice of God. Then the Lord answered Job out of the whirlwind and said, Who is this that darkeneth counsel by words without knowledge? Gird up now thy loins like a man, for I will demand of thee, and thou answer me. Where wast thou when I laid the foundations of the earth? Declare, if thou hast understanding, who hath laid the measures thereof, if thou knowest? Or who hath stretched the line upon it? Whereupon are the foundations thereof fastened? Or who laid the cornerstone thereof? When the morning star sang together, and all the sons of God shouted for joy. She continued on in this vein. We listened. One thing Anna hadn't mentioned about Job is that it was also spectacular poetry. We tend to think of the Bible as a bunch of boring bigots, but Job dazzles beyond wildest expectations. Canst thou bind the sweet influences of Pleiades, or loose the bands of Orion? Canst thou bring forth Mazzaroth in his season, or canst thou guide Arcturus with his sons? Knowest thou the ordinances of heaven? Canst thou set the dominion thereof in the earth? Canst thou lift up thy voice to the clouds, that abundance of waters may cover thee? Canst thou send lightnings, that they may go and say unto thee, Here we are? As a physicist, said Bildad, I feel obligated to say we can send lightnings. All you need is something that produces a high enough voltage, like a big Van der Graaf generator. Anna turned to Bill with fire in her eyes. Her God impression was getting scarily on point. Canst thou draw Leviathan with a fishhook, or is his tongue with a cord, which thou lettest down? Canst thou put a hook into his nose, or bore his jaw through with a thorn? Will he make many supplications unto thee? Will he speak soft words unto thee? Will he make a covenant with thee? Wilt thou take him for a servant forever? Wilt thou play with him as a bird? Sheesh, said Elihu, who was reading ahead in our shared copy. God is so obsessed with this whole Leviathan thing. First he's talking about the earth and the stars and the clouds, and then he decides, no, I'm just going to drop everything and focus on Leviathan for 3 chapters. Well, God canonically is really obsessed with Leviathan, I said. In the Talmud, Rav Yehuda says there's 12 hours in a day. God spends 3 of them studying Torah, 3 judging the world, 3 answering prayers, and 3 playing with Leviathan. That's a quarter of God's time, which you have to imagine is pretty valuable. Everyone looked at me. I shrugged. The Talmud is kind of crazy. You know, said Bildad, what is Leviathan anyway? Like a giant whale or something? So God is saying we need to be able to make whales submit to us and serve us and dance for us and stuff? Because I've been to SeaWorld. We have totally done that. Leviathan is a giant sea dinosaur thing, said Zoe Farr. Like a plesiosaur. Look, it's in the next chapter. It says he has scales and a strong neck. And you don't think if he really existed, we'd Jurassic Park the sucker? It also says he breathes fire. So, proposed Erica, if we can find a fire-breathing whale with scales and a neck, and we bring it to SeaWorld, then we win the Bible? What I think my esteemed cousin meant to say, Anna said cheerfully, dropping the God act, is that God argues here that we're too weak and ignorant to be worthy to know these things. But then the question becomes, exactly how smart do we have to be to deserve an answer? Now that we can, as Bill puts it, send lightning through the sky, now that we can capture whales and make them do tricks for us, does that mean we have the right to ask God for an explanation? Discuss. Maybe, said Elihu. God does not say that we are not worthy. Maybe God says that we can't understand, that we are maybe not smart enough. But, said Eli Foss, when kids aren't smart enough to understand something, we give them the simple explanation. Like when kids ask about lightning, and we say clouds rub against each other and make sparks. It's not totally right, but it's better than nothing. Erica stood up tall, doing her best impression of an overbearing mother. What darketh counsel with words without knowledge? What darkeneth counsel with words without knowledge? Canst thou graduate college? Canst thou go into the office and bring back $40,000 a year? Whence the dishwasher breaketh, is it thou who repairest it? Everyone laughed, except Perendial, who muttered something like, "Do parents really talk that way?" "My doctor talks that way," said Zoe Farr. Whenever I question him about something, he just looks at me and says in this voice, "Which one of us went to medical school?" The Book of Job actually makes a hell of a lot of sense if you suppose God is a doctor, Erica agreed. And, Zoe Farr, it would explain why doctors think they're God. Okay, seriously, Anna said. Who does that? Other than doctors, I mean. Job is asking this very reasonable question. How come I, a righteous man, have been made to suffer immensely? And God actually knows the answer. It's because he wanted to win a bet with Satan. But instead of telling Job that, he spends like 3 entire chapters rubbing in the fact that he's omnipotent and Job isn't. Why would you do that? The part with Satan is weird, said Elihu. If really this is God's reason, then the reason for Job's suffering is different from the reason for everyone else's suffering, right? Bad things happen to most people, but maybe it's not because of a bet between God and Satan at all times. Yeah, girl's got a point, said Bildad. I remembered, Elihu said, when we left the harmonious Jade Dragon Empire. I kept asking my parents, what's happening? Where do we go? Because I was young. And they say, we're going on a vacation. But I say, why are we going on vacation during school time? Then they got very angry with me and told me I should mind my own beehive. Beeswax, Bildad corrected. Okay, but they were trying to protect me. They knew if I heard the real answer, I would start crying, become upset, maybe run away. Maybe the real reason God allows evil is something terrible. Maybe he's trying to protect us from knowing something. Everyone was quiet for a second. In the Talmud, said Eli Foss, Rabbi Akiva says that apparent evil is always for a greater good. For example, he tells the story of the time he was traveling to a town and no one would let him stay in the inn. So he tried to camp in the woods, but his fire went out and he was alone in the cold and darkness. But that night, a bunch of bandits raided the town and killed and enslaved everyone. If Akiva had been staying in the inn, or if he'd had a fire burning, they would have found him and killed him. That's stupid, said Erica. God could just make there not be bandits. Yes, sometimes more suffering is necessary to prevent greater suffering, but then you ask why there has to be the greater suffering. And if you keep pushing it back further, then eventually you get to the greatest suffering of all, and the buck stops there. In a different part of the Talmud, I said, Rabbi Akiva gives a different explanation. He says that the heaven-bound righteous have a few sins, and since those sins won't be punished in heaven, they have to be punished here on earth. Therefore, the righteous suffer on earth, but even the hell-bound wicked have a few virtues. And since those virtues won't be rewarded in hell, they have to be rewarded here on earth. Therefore, the wicked prosper on earth. And then people ask why the righteous suffer and the wicked prosper, and it looks like a mystery, but it actually makes total sense. As a physicist, said Bildad, I think you could model that as a sort of bimodal distribution of suffering. But instead, intuitively, there's more of a normal distribution of suffering. And although people complain that the wicked prosper and the righteous suffer, there's not a perfect correlation. I don't even know if there's a correlation at all. It seems more like suffering happens at random, regardless of how good of a person you are. Well, I was raised Catholic, said Zoe Farr. In church school, we always learned that evil is just the absence of good. So God didn't create evil, he just has a finite and limited amount of good, not always as much as we'd like. So people aren't as nice as they could be, and sometimes the weather forms storms and tornadoes. But it's not because there's this active force called evil out there. It's just because the weather's doing its own thing, unrestrained by God, pouring infinite amounts of good into it. No, said Anna forcefully, abandoning her role as referee and joining in the discussion. That's not right. There are certainly bad people who just fulfill their natural selfishness without having any good get in the way. Bankers, CEOs of the theonomics, Unsong agents, cops, politicians. They just do what the system tells them, follow their incentives, and with no concern for the consequences. But then there are other people, sadists, serial killers, who delight in causing other people pain. Eli Wiesel said the opposite of love wasn't hate, it was indifference. I beg to differ. Have any of you ever read about what the Japanese did to the Chinese in Nanking? Side note, as the reader, it's horrifying, if you didn't know. The Nazis, mostly just wanted some people dead and went about it in a horrifically efficient way. The Japanese, they enjoyed it. They worked hard on it. They deviated from efficiency, from self-interest. They sacrificed their own self-interest to be as perfectly cruel as possible. And hell, Thamiel and his demons, they're not indifferent. They're evil. There's a difference. Well, it looks like a difference to us, said Zoe Farr. But maybe on a metaphysical level, that sort of depravity is just what a total, absolute absence of good looks like. I remember seeing a video, said Anna, of the president's summit with the devil. It was in this big hall. First the president came in and they all sang the Star-Spangled Banner. Then Thamiel came in and the band played the Anthem of Hell. It was horrible. I didn't even know instruments could make noises like that. They were all out of tune and fighting with each other and going at weird intervals that tricked the ear and made me want to pull my hair out. Okay, so, said Zoe, maybe the hell music was the absolute total absence of good in music. No, said Anna. There's good music, and then there's total silence. And then there's that. It's not silence. It's the opposite of music. Unsong, I suggested. Everyone except Anna laughed. Yes. Unsong. Garlic angel hair, Erica said at that moment, and brought a big pot of pasta to the table. Everyone made approving noises, except Perendial, who asked something about where one could find these garlic angels, and had to be taken aside and given a quick explanation. The angel took some of the pasta and half-heartedly put it in his cup of soup. The reason I bring this all up, said Anna, in between mouthfuls, is that here we are. We're Unitarians and singers. We've got a movement. We think we're on the side of good, that we know what's evil. Evil is when Unsong and the Theonomics try to control the names of God and keep them from the people. We think we know what we have to do. We take up Reverend Stevens' crusade and spread the names to as many people as possible. We think we know, on a political level, this all makes sense. But on a theological level, even Reverend Stevens barely touched this. Why does God have these names that work miracles but not tell us what they are? Why does he suffer them to be distributed throughout a namespace that can only be searched through a combination of cryptological acumen and brute force? Why does he permit them to be hidden by clipot, by which they can be bought and sold without letting the customer grasp their true structure? Why would he create enough magic to make the world a paradise for all living things, then place it somewhere it can be kept in a locked vault to enrich the few? Why, as the Bible put it, does he hide his light under a bushel? Well, it seems clear enough to me, said Bildad. God's not a big guy in the sky. He's a force, like physical forces, but on a higher level. He doesn't plan these things any more than anyone plans gravity. It just happens. So you're denying the Bible? Eli Foss said, somewhat less intimidating than intended, due to a mouthful of pasta. We're sitting here at a table with an angel and a Kabbalist, and you're denying the Bible? Okay, look, we all know that the Bible was given by Uriel, not God. Most of it just records Uriel's interventions in the world, which are usually well-intentioned, but certainly not omniscient. Why not the book of Job, too? Job asks a hard question and gets yelled at. It sounds exactly like Uriel on a bad day. I can even imagine him going on about Leviathan for like an hour, describing how interesting he finds each of its fins and teeth and things while Job gets more and more and more confused. A few people snorted. But Uriel, said Eli Foss, has always said he's just trying to follow God's plan as he understands it. Well, the Pope says the same thing, said Bill Dodd. That doesn't mean he's met the guy. Okay, well, someone had to have created the world, protested Elihu. And all the angels, and the names, and the Kabbalah. I'm not saying there's not a creator force, said Bill Dodd. I'm just saying it shouldn't be thought of as a person. Thomas Aquinas, said Zoe Farr, tells us that God is not a person, not at all, not even close, but can sometimes be compared to one, since a person is the most intelligent entity we have to compare it to. It's like how they used to say the brain was a telephone switchboard. It's much more than that, but if all you have is a metaphor is a telephone switchboard, it's better than nothing. Okay, but if God can't even figure out, said Bill Dodd, that if you want perfect good, you should avoid having evil, well, whatever he is, it's got to be kind of dumb. Oh, said Perendial. There was worry in his eyes. You shouldn't say that. That's blasphemy. Be nice, Bill, said Anna. There are angels here. I feel like we're forgetting something pretty important, said Erica. And I hate to go all dualist here, but we know there's a hell. We know there's a devil. I'm not saying that God and the devil are exactly equally powerful, but maybe it's not quite so one-sided that God can just steamroll over Thamiel without a second thought. Maybe there's some kind of strategic balance going on? Anna looked shocked. Perendial looked horrified. But it was Eli Foss who spoke first. Erica, he said, God is one. That's the whole point. You can't just go around saying there are two separate beings with similar levels of godlike power. That's like saying there's two gods. It's serious blasphemy. Also, as an aside, from the reader, I'm pretty sure that's also Zoroastrianism. I think. It's been a minute. Well, said Erica, maybe if God didn't want people saying the devil is just as powerful as he is, he should stop making the world full of evil just as much as good. Maybe if he didn't want us saying he's too weak to save everyone who's sick or suffering or in hell, he should just get off his cosmic ass and save them. When Anna spoke now, it was very serious. Moreover, the Lord answered Job, and said, Shall he contendeth with the Almighty instruct him? He that reproveth God, let him answer it. Wilt thou also disannul my judgment? Wilt thou condemn me, that thou mayest be righteous? Huh, I exclaimed. And everyone looked at me. That verse from the Rubaiyat, the one Nixon used in the 70s, it goes, O thou who burns with tears for those who burn, in hell whose fires will find thee in thy turn. Hope not the Lord thy God to mercy teach, for who art thou to teach, or he to learn? That's from Job. That's gotta be. Chaim must have read Job. Well, said Zoe, it's certainly got the right amount of condescension. What are we talking about? Asked Perendial. Hast thou an arm like God? Anna recited. Or canst thou thunder with a voice like him? Okay, said Bildad, we get the idea. Deck thyself now with majesty and excellency, and array thyself with glory and beauty. Is somebody saying there are two gods? Asked Perendial. Because God is one. Cast abroad the rage of thy wrath, and behold every one that is proud and abase him. Okay, said Alihu, that's enough. She grabbed the Book of Job from Anna's hands. Anna grabbed it back. A tug of war. Dessert's ready, said Erica. God is one, and his name is one, insisted Perendial. That is very important. It's devil's food cake, Erica said, bringing a plate to the table. No! Perendial shouted at Erica and her cake, and in a flash he was on his feet, a sword of fire materializing in his hands, rushing towards her. Ali pulled the book away from Anna. This is not how we do theodicy in this house, I shouted to Ali and Anna. Help! Shouted Anna. Immigrants are stealing my Job! Wait, said Bildad. I just got it. The house is called Ithaca because that's where theodicy happens. Fuck. It's just dessert, Erica screamed at the oncoming Perendial. No, Anna shouted. That's the whole point of Job. There are no just desserts. I reached into my pocket, pulled out my scroll wheel, and activated the thunderclap name. A deafening boom filled the room. Everybody went silent. Thanks, Aaron, Erica said, defeated. All right, everyone sit down. Perendial, sort away. No more theodicy. Time for dessert. And I'm actually going to go ahead and stop there. We're not quite done with Chapter 5. God, how much is left in this? Yeah. There's still 2 more parts to it. Okay. I'm going to stop up through Part 3 of Chapter 5, and I will pick this one back up. I'll try and post this midweek. And if not, then I'll pick this up and continue on to the next piece. But not really too worried about structure. I'm running out of, throat feels, and I also need to take a shower. I was in a pool for a good portion of yesterday, and I did not shower afterwards, so I kind of had that chlorine and water stank. Anyway, I hope that you enjoyed it. Hope that you guys have a good weekend. Good time of things. It is, it's a major U.S. holiday that I think is being pretty shamed recently. So, there's that. But, anyway, you guys all take care, and I'll catch y'all later. Deuces.